Speaking of AI, NVIDIA, the stock is flat today after more than a 6% drop yesterday. That was despite a beat on earnings, revenue, and guidance, as investors focus now on the size of the beats coming down. So what does this signal for the broader AI ecosystem? Joining us now is former SoftBank president Alok Sama. He led the acquisition of ARM Holdings and the merger of Sprint and T-Mobile while at SoftBank. He's also the author of The Money Trap, which is out in a few weeks. Alok, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And congrats on the book. We'll get to it in a minute. But first, given what we're seeing in this market play out this week with NVIDIA and the deal that you spearheaded, ARM Holdings at SoftBank, what do you make of the competitive landscape?
Well, I think at least for me, and I don't follow stocks, I trade stocks on a day-to-day basis, I thought the NVIDIA results were much ado about nothing. I mean, it's a company that beat its consensus estimates, and you can get hung up on kind of Blackwell manufacturing in 2 or 3 months off of the other, but the company's competitive position is just remarkable.
It's remarkable.
As strong as it's ever been.
And yet there are so many that are trying to become the next NVIDIA, including your former employer, SoftBank, acquiring Graphcore, which is working on a chip that they hope will rival NVIDIA. Personally, you've invested in Cerebras. Their CEO joined CNBC yesterday about what they're trying to do to compete, but yet no one has a scale. So when do we see a real competitor out there?
I don't see it on the horizon. I mean, Cerebras, Graphcore, I mean, the big action for NVIDIA, I mean, 45% of their revenues come from the hyperscalers, right? And Cerebras, I mean, they've announced a couple of deals, Mayo Clinic, G42 out in Abu Dhabi. Interesting stuff, but they haven't made a dent with the guys that really count, and that's the Microsoft and the Googles of the world, right? So I don't think of them as challengers. They are alternatives, and if I'm in Jensen's shoes, I actually want to see out there a few of those out there, more than a few of those out there, because otherwise you got the FTC knocking on your door.
We talk a lot this week about their gross margins, 75% there and thereabouts. Yeah. Where will it be in 5 years' time?
I would wager they'd be lower. I think that nobody wants the type of dominance in the ecosystem that NVIDIA has. And one insight I might throw out, and I think Apple's release, or they've already announced it, but more details around Apple Intelligence will be very interesting. And I think it's interesting because it's going to be all about AI at the edge. So AI in smartphones. And I would wager that you will be able to do, or AI in terms of how you and I might interact with AI as opposed to the enterprise level, will be much more at the edge in terms of devices like smartphones. And that actually plays nicely into the strength of ARM Holdings, because more intelligent, more complicated chips in smartphones, that's ARM's sweet spots. I mean, your average iPhone over the last few years has had somewhere between 6 and 10 ARM-designed chips anyway, and those chips are going to be smarter, and they're going to be more expensive, great for ARM. Less so for NVIDIA, which is much more, even though ARM's trying to make a dent in that market, less so because NVIDIA's dominance is in data centers. But again, ARM with Graphcore, and there's been some media, I'm not an insider, I'm 5 years out of SoftBank, but it's very reasonable to think about SoftBank with ARM, with the acquisition of Graphcore, to think about really in scale creating a competitor to NVIDIA.
If you just take a step back and look at the amount of spending by the hyperscalers on artificial intelligence, does it remind you of a company like SoftBank, the amount they were spending just to find a unicorn? And if this is a bubble of some sort, are you sniffing that out?
No, I don't. It's nothing like SoftBank's expenditure. I think investments. I think the more appropriate parallel, which I have thought about and others have talked about and written about, is with the year 2000, where there was just a massive, massive investment in telecom infrastructure, in broadband infrastructure. You had companies, Global Crossing is one, which was once worth over $100 billion, went to zero. I think that is a little bit of what's going on, but the consequences are not nearly as dire, because the people who are spending money are completely aware that they might be, and they probably are, overinvesting, and they've made the judgment that the risk is underinvestment and not overinvestment. So the Microsofts and the Google, I mean, I think the number was $105 billion spent last quarter in call it broadly AI infrastructure, which is literally like buying land and building data centers. They can afford to lose.
Well, all right, we're going to switch gears a bit, taking a look at NVIDIA and just talking about NVIDIA. It used to be NVIDIA's market, Steph. The way NVIDIA went, the market went. Then we saw NVIDIA actually had a really great earnings report, but the stock slid, and then the next day, all the indices were up.
Yeah.
What do you make of that as we go into September? Is NVIDIA still a driving force for the market, or has that somehow changed?
Well, 7% of the S&P 500 weighting. It's 22% of the SMH, so it does carry a big weight there, too.
Right.
It is actually a bigger weight than staples and energy, utilities, REITs, and materials. I mean, it's a bigger weight, so of course it's going to have an important impact. It was down yesterday only because the expectations were so high. There's nothing wrong with it. The demand is still there. We're talking hyperscalers all week long, right? And they're spending 40% more this year, and that's going to definitely benefit NVIDIA, but other names as well. I just think, up 151% year to date into the print, and the print was good and the guide was good. Maybe it just wasn't enough for the day,
right?
But I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Jim?
I own a nice sized chunk of NVIDIA. I'm very happy holding it. I was not thrown at all by yesterday's price movement. I don't think anybody really was. I don't think anybody came out yesterday and said, oh, this is the time to sell NVIDIA. Look, the price to earnings multiple on next year's earnings, and they're on a January calendar year, so it's actually fiscal year 26, but it's 29 times the year that ends in January of 2026. I mean, that's basically the forward earnings. 29 times for a company that's growing earnings at 35%, I'll take that all day long. Now, there's a voice in my head that says, and I'm sure everybody else is saying it too, how long will 35% earnings growth last? And the answer is not forever. So this is not a forever stock at this price. However, for the next few quarters, it seems very likely, if you just look at all the capital expenditures from Google, Meta, and everybody else, for the next few quarters, it looks like their order book is going to be very strong. If the stock gets up towards a 40 times multiple, maybe we look at trimming it there. It's not a forever stock, but it's a beauty right now, and I'm not intending to trim it in the near term.
Jim, just one point of order. According to our system, and I know you're looking at it at a different date point, but we have it at 40 times forward earnings in our system.
Okay.
Just as a point of order, because we're going to show it, I'm sure, at some point. Bryn, coming over to you. You're an NVIDIA shareholder. Your view on the quarter and just the impact on the broader market. Steph was again alluding to this. It's 6% of the SPY. It's about 7.5% of the triple Qs. Mm-hmm. So big weighting, big influence, but we haven't seen that influence this week so much.
Right. Well, I mean, the stock, first of all, I implore all the viewers to listen to the earnings call. It was just a wonderful earnings call. And if you want to understand what's happening in the ecosystem, Jensen and Colette walked through that, I just think, masterfully. I mean, he spent about 10 minutes on the Q&A about one of the analysts asked, when is this going to monetize? How long is this going to last? And, he spent about 10 minutes on his answer, and firmly that we're in the early stages here. I do think if NVIDIA did nothing for the rest of the year, it's still going to be probably the best performing stock. And so I do think that, to Jim's point, it's not going to last forever. But in terms of this stock being a forever stock, it is I think it's the best performing stock over the last 20 years. I do think that you do have a unique scenario with Jensen. I mean, he's the founder, CEO. Having someone at the helm for that long, they're going to continue to run really fast. I'm looking forward to people just stopping to talk about it. I just think it's so over discussed. It was a great quarter. It's a great company, great CEO. Let's just look at other names as well and not be so focused on one single name that really just continues to execute. I don't know why you'd sell it, because they just execute, growing revenues, growing earnings. I mean, a total triple play. They raise guidance. I just think it's a story stock that we haven't seen before in a really long time with a company of this magnitude.
I mean, just looking at the chart, up just about 140% year to date. So you're right. It's a stock that's pretty much unprecedented.
All right, I hope you're all having a great weekend. If you normally don't listen to this portion of these videos, that is completely fine, but I think you might want to listen into this one if you missed yesterday's video, because I'm going to lay out a very reasonable case as to why I think NVIDIA's growth rate could reaccelerate in the future. With that being said, I'm going to recap most of what I said in yesterday's video in case you missed it, because I think it is very important. Before we get to that, let me briefly point out a couple things on NVIDIA's chart. So this past Thursday, we closed just underneath the 50-day moving average on the daily time frame. The 50 MA is the purple line on your screen, and typically when we close below this moving average on the daily time frame, we trade under it for a number of days before moving higher. You can see that happen a couple of times on the chart that you're looking at right now. If I were to go back even further on the chart, you would see the same thing happen on multiple occasions. Of course, patterns tend to repeat themselves, but they don't always have to. And yesterday, although NVIDIA had a nice green day, we still closed below the 50 MA on the daily time frame. I'll be watching the days ahead to see if we get a retest of this support trend line that stretches all the way back to January of this year. Now I want to go back to NVIDIA's earnings report for a moment and mention something very, very important that I just realized yesterday. If I had to summarize the earnings report and conference call, I would say that NVIDIA reported a great quarter. They beat consensus estimates on revenue, EPS, and guidance. However, although they beat expectations, some market participants perceive the report as a mild disappointment because NVIDIA did not beat estimates as much as they have in recent quarters, and this caused market participants to worry about NVIDIA's rate of growth slowing. And don't get me wrong, the rate of growth did technically slow this quarter, but I think it is entirely possible for the growth rate to reaccelerate at some point in the future, and I will get to that in just a moment. First, let me add some context and set this up for you. So on NVIDIA's conference call, they acknowledged that they made a change to the Blackwell GPU mask, and we can infer that this likely caused Blackwell to be delayed by about 3 months. Jensen Huang said the change to the mask is complete and Blackwell is expected to ship in Q4. And listen to this because it is very important. NVIDIA expects to bring in, quote, several $billion of Blackwell revenue in Q4 when Blackwell begins to ship. So the word several means more than two, but not many. So let's just say that NVIDIA is expecting $3 billion of Blackwell revenue in Q4. Now think about this for a second and let's put it all together. Blackwell is delayed by about 3 months and NVIDIA expects to see roughly $3 billion in revenue from Blackwell in the first quarter that it starts to ship. So if there had not been a 3-month delay in Blackwell, then NVIDIA likely would have guided next quarter's revenue higher by about $3 billion. The street was expecting NVIDIA's Q3 guidance to be $31.77 billion, and NVIDIA guided for $32.5 billion. If Blackwell had not been delayed by 3 months, then we would have seen next quarter's guidance likely include an extra $3 billion, bringing the total for Q3 guidance up to $35.5 billion, nearly $4 billion higher than consensus estimates. And if NVIDIA had guided for revenue of $35.5 billion next quarter, then the overall trend of NVIDIA's growth rate acceleration would have remained intact. Do you see why this is such a big deal? It all comes down to the delay in Blackwell. If Blackwell had not been delayed by 3 months, then Q3 guidance would have been roughly $3 billion higher, and therefore the market probably would have reacted much more positively to this earnings report. It all comes down to Blackwell. This is a very big deal because it means that we very well could see revenue growth reaccelerate in the future once Blackwell ships in volume. Of course, I don't know what the future holds, and I could be completely wrong, but this seems very reasonable to me. Additionally, Jensen Huang emphasized on the earnings call that Blackwell is so much more than just a chip. It's an entire platform. It's not only the chip, but it's also the rack, the wiring, the cooling, mounds of software, etc. This means that NVIDIA has great earnings potential from Blackwell because it's not just a chip, it's an entire platform. In the short term, it is entirely possible that the market could treat NVIDIA more like a typical mega-cap tech stock, and therefore we may not see the massive hype-driven upward swings in NVIDIA stock that we've seen recently. Be that as it may, from a long-term perspective, I am bullish on the future of NVIDIA, and I think it is very encouraging that we could once again see NVIDIA's growth rate reaccelerate at some point in the future. The reality is that right now, hyperscalers like Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Google, and Tesla simply cannot afford to be late on AI. They must invest in AI now, or else they will be quickly left behind by their competition. And for right now, NVIDIA is the undisputable leader in AI chips, and it's not even close. So whether or not we see NVIDIA's growth rate reaccelerate with Blackwell shipping in volume, I'm still bullish on the long-term future of NVIDIA. Of course, I don't know what the future holds, but I think this company has a very clear runway of long-term growth ahead of it. With all of that being said, I hope you're all having a great Labor Day weekend. Remember that markets are closed this Monday for Labor Day. I'm thinking about making a different type of video on Monday, and maybe I'll share a swing trade idea with all of you in that video. That being said, I hope you have a great day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.